از بامداد امروز بنزین به صورت سهمیه بندی در جایگاه‌های عرضه سوق توزیع شد.
اون چه ما تصویب کردیم مورد نظر سران سه قوه بوده.
دو تا از مسئولین پلیس آتیش زدن.
مسئولین حفظ امنیت کشور هم به وظایفشون عمل کنن.
Recalling Iran's nationwide November 2019 protests. On Friday, November 15, 2019, the Iranian regime declared a sudden hike in gas prices. On the same night, Iranians frustrated from economic constraints poured into the streets in different cities to voice their outrage at the government's policies. What began as social protests turned into a nationwide rally against the ruling theocracy that continued for a week. These protests shook the very pillars of the mullah's regime to their core. From early Saturday morning of November 16, people began lighting fires in the streets, turning off their vehicles to block roads, and closing highways and other paths leading to the country's cities. The popular uprising quickly spread to 160 cities across the country. Demands for a decrease in gasoline prices turned into slogans calling for regime change. The regime's forces responded to the peaceful demonstrations by attacking the people and breaking their vehicle windows.
25 آبان مردم به خاطر گرانی بلند شدن اعتراض مسلمات آمیز کردن. یه دونه شیشه ماشین یا پنجره رو نشکستن. با کتک جواب دادن.
The people in turn attacked banks, gas stations, police stations, governors' offices, police trailers, vehicles and motorcycles belonging to security forces, bases of the Revolutionary Guards and Basij paramilitary forces, supermarkets linked to the IRGC, offices of Iranian regime Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's representatives, setting ablaze anything that was owned by the corrupt regime. Most of these clashes were reported in the cities of Shahriyar, Shahr Quds, Shiraz, Behbahan, Isfahan and Tehran. The incidents of the past few days were somewhat different from the seditions of previous years because to some extent, political motivations were formed in the wake of economic protests, said Alireza Adiani, Khamenei's representative in state police on November 21, 2019, according to the state-run Basij news outlet. As an individual on the ground, I believe only God saved us, said Basij Commander Brigadier General Salar Abnoush, according to the semi-official ISNA news agency. On the first day, 28 provinces and 100 cities were engaged with this issue, said Deputy IRGC Chief Ali Fadawi on November 22, 2019. In 5 provinces, we were engaged in far more intense crises, said Regime Interior Minister Abdulreza Rahmani Fazli on November 26, 2019.
ولی در 5-6 استانمان این شدت داشت و از نظر توزیع جغرافیایی هم بیش از 50% این تو مناطق حاشیه‌ای بود، هم در شهرهای بزرگ. 5 استانمان بله شرایط واقعا ویژه‌ای بود، ولی بقیه استان‌ها به راحتی که عرض می‌کنم در مدت زمان کوتاهی مدیریت شد، بقیه‌اش هم ولی بیش از 50 مورد پایگاه و پاسگاه نظامی و امنیتی بوده که مورد حمله قرار گرفت. به صورت مقطعی و موضعی اینترنت را دستور دادیم که حتما یعنی شورای امنیت تشکیل جلسه داده بود، مرتب پیگیری میکرد. حجم اطلاعاتی که در شورای امنیت مطرح شد که این باید مسدود بشه. اول محدود سازی شد، ولی بعد که جلو رفتیم خیلی دامن این قضیه گسترده پیدا کرد به استان‌های دیگر. حالا در اینجا تصمیم گرفتن که این مسدود سازی بشه.
یک شنبه فقط در یه نقطه در تهران 147 نقطه درگیر داشتیم. 900 پمپ بنزین در کشور آتش زدن. دشمن طراحی کرده بود. دیده بودن برای پایان دیما و اوائل بهمن ماه که بحران رو در کشور درست کنن.
یعنی طراحی کرد.
بله طراحی کرد. ما اطلاع داریم. این اتفاقی که افتاد اون موضوع رو جلو انداخت.
Shiraz was the main city with the utmost protests and clashes. Locals were still in deep grief from the March 2019 floods in this city, which saw no relief efforts by the government. On the first and second days of the uprising, at least 120 Basij and police bases, military bases, the regime's religious sites, gas stations, and banks were destroyed by locals. People had gained control over many areas of Shiraz and had practically blocked the main road connecting the city to Tehran. Authorities dispatched helicopters and sprayed bullets from above onto the demonstrators to regain control over the city. The amount of damage left from the uprising was reported at 200 trillion riyals, around $1.74 billion at the time, by regime officials, along with a loss of about $1.5 billion due to cutting off the internet. All in all, more than 1,890 regime-associated sites were attacked by protesters across Iran. On Sunday, November 17th, Khamenei associated this uprising to the Iranian opposition People's Mojahedin Organization of Iran, PMOIMEK, and ordered an all-out crackdown.
شما ملاحظه کنید در این 2 روز تقریباً، یعنی 2 شب و 1 روزی که از این قضایا گذشته، همه مراکز شرارت دنیا علیه ما این کارها رو تشویق کردند. مجموعه خبیث و جنایتکار منافقین اینا دارن مرتباً در فضای مجازی و در جاهای دیگه دارن تشویق میکنن، ترغیب میکنن که این شرارت ها انجام بگیره. من عرضم اینه، هیچ کس به این اشرار کمک نکنه. هیچ انسان عاقل و شایسته‌ای که به کشور خودش علاقه‌منده، به زندگی راحت خودش علاقه‌منده، به اینا نباید کمک بکنه. این اون توصیه ماست. مسئولین کشور هم به وظایفشون به طور جدی عمل کنن.
Do whatever it takes to end it, Khamenei told top security and government officials, according to a Reuters report. These remarks by Khamenei shed light on his deep concerns about the uprising overthrowing his entire regime. He issued orders for a massive crackdown, allowing his forces to launch a killing spree. As a result, they killed at least 1,500 people with direct fire. One example of the regime's crimes is seen in this video of shooting a protester at point-blank range. Following Khamenei's orders, security forces began shooting demonstrators in the head and raising the number of casualties to create fear among protesters. Blind and widespread arrests in the streets, authorities going to hospitals and controlling the injured, taking dead bodies from the morgues of cemeteries, and controlling the computer systems of forensics in order to cloak the true number of deaths were among the other measures used to crack down the protests. In the town of Shahr Quds near Tehran, the governor proudly said she had ordered security forces to shoot at anyone entering the government building.
من گفته بودم بهشون که هر که از در فرمانداری وارد شد داخل بزنیم.
Afterward, the regime's interior minister literally praised her measures and strengthened her position as governor.
ما شهر قدسمان فرماندارمان یک خانم، یک بانوست در اونجا. من واقعا خیلی ازشون تقدیر و تشکر کردم. به هر حال شهامت و جرأت و مسئولیت پذیری ایشان بود.
In some cities such as Mojahedin in southwest Iran, the regime's security forces used armored vehicles, helicopters, and large caliber machine guns against the protesters. In Mojahedin, armed security forces chased down local youths and forced them into a marsh area. They then opened fire with heavy machine guns on the young men hiding in the marshes, killing many of them. The scope of the regime's crackdown in November 2019 was, without a doubt, unprecedented in the regime's 4-decade history. On December 6, 2019, Michelle Basij, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, described the crackdown and killing of demonstrators in Iran as a flagrant violation of international commitment and principles on the use of force and a dire case of human rights violations. Another issue mentioned by many in reference to this uprising was the PMOI-MEK's role in this outburst of nationwide protests. This especially includes the regime's own officials and state media. The main difference between the uprising and those of previous years was the organized nature of the events. Regime officials especially raised this issue in their remarks, referring to the PMOI-MEK resistance units inside Iran as the leading force behind the country's uprising. Resistance units are teams with a few to several members, and their main objective during the past few years has been to lead the country's uprisings and counter the atmosphere of fear imposed by the regime. See the link in the description to know more about the resistance unit's activities against the regime's crackdown measures. On November 17, 2019, Ali Khamenei, chair of the regime's Supreme National Security Council, held a press conference focusing on the nationwide protests. These individuals are linked to the PMOI-MEK. I believe we have arrested 34 MEK members so far and identified a large network of channels that are active not under the MEK banner but following their modus operandi, he said. Furthermore, heroic women played an incredibly significant role throughout the November 2019 uprising, showing practical leadership on the streets, bravery, and the remarkable speed necessary that is needed in uprisings. The high level of violence, organization, and using ladies to launch the initial clashes was a new tactic, said IRGC spokesperson Ramazan Sharif on November 25, 2019, according to the regime's Khabar Fori website.
قبل از این قضایا چند روز قبل از قضایای آبان ماه، این قضایای مربوط به بنزین و این حرفا، در یک کشور اروپایی، یک کشور کوچک اما شریر، واقعا خبیث، در اروپا، یه عنصر آمریکایی با یه تعداد ایرانی مزدور وطن فروش جمع شدن دور هم علیه جمهوری اسلامی، بنا کردن، برنامه ریزی کردن و نقشه درست کردن. نقشه هم همون چیزی بود که ما چند روز بعدش در قضایای بنزین دیدیم.
The Iranian people, with their unprecedented struggle and firm chants, made it crystal clear that the freedom-loving movement in Iran has entered a new phase. The mullah's regime, with all its factions, is the main source of the Iranian people's miseries. If the word on the ground during the December 2017, January 2018 uprising was the end of the reformist principalist scenario within the regime, in November 2019 the people entered the path of an uprising to realize their democratic alternative as the only solution forward. The resistance unit's strategy in cities, towns, and neighborhoods has found its ground. The Iranian people and their organized resistance movement have reached a point of no return. They have once again proven to the world that the only means to save the Iranian people is to overthrow the ruling mullah's regime. Iranian opposition NCRI President-elect Maryam Rajavi said at a ceremony commemorating the martyrs of the November 2019 uprising,
این یکی از هولناکترین جنایت‌های قرن 21 که جهان به چشم می‌بینه. جهان می‌بینه که رژیم آخوندها حتی از کشتار کودکان و نوجوانان 13-14 ساله ابا نمی‌کنه. اما بگذارید تاکید کنم، رژیمی که این جوانان و نوجوانان برای سرنگونیش به خیابانها آمده اند، غیر ممکن است که دیگر بتواند خود را سر پا نگه دارد. اگر خامنه‌ای و پاسدارانش فکر می‌کنند با پر کردن نیزارهای ماه شهر از پیکرها و خون مردم بی‌دفاع ما می توانند به حکومت خود ادامه دهند، سخت در اشتباهند. آری، این قهرمانان و این شهیدان سرفراز ما هستند که خامنه‌ای را به عنوان دستوردهنده اصلی این کشتار بزرگ در خیابان‌های ایران به منفورترین دیکتاتور خوناشام این زمانه تبدیل کردند.